I recently watched an open discussion between Muslim scholars and ex-Muslim scholars about one of the most difficult subjects in Islamic history, sex slavery. I actually appreciated the tone of the discussion. The hosts were respectful for much of the stream, and I think these conversations are worth having. But after listening to both sides, I walked away with one overwhelming impression. Everyone kept talking about slavery, prisoners of war, and historical context. Almost nobody stayed focused on the actual moral question. The host's central argument was essentially this: Islam did not invent slavery. It inherited an existing institution, regulated it, encouraged the freeing of slaves, and improved their treatment. For the sake of argument, let's assume every one of those claims is correct. I still don't think they answer the central objection. The question isn't whether slavery existed before Islam. The question is this: why would the greatest moral example for all humanity ever participate in creating new slaves and permit sexual access to captive women? That is the question. Everything else feels like a distraction. Imagine for a moment that I concede every historical point the hosts made. Let's assume slavery already existed. Let's assume the wars were defensive. Let's assume Islam improved conditions compared to surrounding societies. Even if I grant every single one of those premises, how does any of that justify sexual access to a captive woman? If the argument is that these women needed food, feed them. If they needed shelter, shelter them. If they needed protection, protect them. If they needed financial support, support them. If they had no surviving family, integrate them into families. Treat them as sisters. Treat them as daughters. Treat them as honored members of society. Why does any of that require ownership? More importantly, why does any of that require sex? Throughout the discussion, one ex-Muslim caller repeatedly brought the conversation back to this exact point. Every time the discussion drifted toward historical context or legal regulations, he returned to the victim. Because morality isn't ultimately about legal systems, it's about people. Imagine an innocent woman. Her father is dead. Her husband is dead. Her brothers are dead. Her sons are dead. Her city has fallen. She didn't choose this war. She didn't command an army. Yet now she becomes property. Someone else owns her. Someone else decides whether she is free. Someone else claims sexual rights over her. When I hear people defend this system, I keep wondering, why is the conversation centered on the rights of the captor instead of the dignity of the captive? One defense offered was that Islam gradually eliminated slavery. I have two problems with that argument. First, gradual reform makes sense for human legislators. Human beings face political constraints, but Muslims believe Allah is all-knowing, all-powerful, and perfectly good. If Allah can command prayer, prohibit pork, and regulate countless aspects of life, why couldn't He simply say, no human being may ever own another human being? Or, no one may ever claim sexual rights over a captive? The second problem is even bigger. People often say Islam abolished slavery, but where? Where does the Quran abolish it? Where does the Prophet abolish it? If slavery and concubinage remain legally permissible in principle within the traditional framework, then saying Islam abolished slavery is a very different claim from saying modern Muslims reject slavery. Most Muslims today would never own slaves. Most Muslims today would never buy or sell another human being. Most Muslims today would never claim sexual rights over a captive woman. I genuinely respect that. But then I have to ask, where did those moral convictions come from? Because they certainly don't come from defending slavery or concubinage. One point I want to make absolutely clear is that my objection isn't based on emotion alone. I believe morality is grounded in the flourishing of conscious beings. Violating another person's autonomy causes profound physical, psychological, emotional, and sexual harm. That is why rape is wrong. That is why slavery is wrong. That is why treating another person as property is wrong. Some believers respond by saying, if God commands something, then by definition it becomes good. But imagine someone today captured your mother, wife, sister, or daughter and claimed God gave him permission to have sex with her. Would you accept that explanation? Or would every moral instinct inside you recognize that something deeply unjust has happened? If we're willing to suspend our moral faculties whenever someone invokes divine authority, then almost any atrocity can be justified. As I listen to this discussion, I realize the deeper issue isn't slavery. It's this. What kind of person deserves to be called the greatest example for all humanity? For me, the answer is surprisingly simple. A truly timeless moral example would never treat innocent, captive women as sexual property. He would feed them, protect them, restore their dignity, help reunite families, help rebuild lives. He would never blur compassion with ownership. He would never blur protection with sexual access. Instead, Muslims are asked to believe that the greatest human being who ever lived participated in a system that involved enslaving captives and permitting concubinage according to the traditional Islamic sources. Meanwhile, the overwhelming majority of Muslims today would reject those same practices if anyone proposed them. That tension is the heart of this debate, so I'll leave you with one question. If your conscience tells you that enslaving innocent captives and claiming sexual rights over them is wrong, why are you spending so much energy defending it simply because it appears in the life of the man you believe is the greatest example for all mankind?